Hey everyone, I'm Zenith Priest, and welcome to my introduction of Shadows Flicker Like Flame, where I will give you insight into the nature of this spirit and show you how to drive off the invaders by turn 5. Looking at the overview panel, we see that Shadows Flicker Like Flame is a low complexity fear spirit with some offense and control. The playstyle suggests a focus on preventing entrenchment and hinting that we shouldn't forget our special rule. That special rule allows us to use Shadows of the Dahan, granting us reach into Dahan lands by spending an energy. Our growth options allow us to place a single presence as long as we don't reclaim, and a choice between gaining a power or some energy. Our presence tracks reveals a slower start with 0 energy and only a single card play, though with one exception, every presence removed does increase our capacity in some manner. Darkness Swallows the Unwary is an excellent innate to halt builds, with bonus fear for the higher thresholds, and extra damage should the invaders persist into the long game. Also note that this is the only starting power that needs a Sacred Sight. For our unique powers, Concealing Shadows will protect the Dahan from ravaging invaders, allowing for decisive counterattacks at the expense of blighting the land. Crops Wither and Fade will slowly erode buildings, helping us reach our victory condition, or simply reducing incoming damage to something more manageable. As a slow power, we can also consider lands that may build, not just buildings that already exist. Favors Called Due gathers a large number of Dahan into a single land, pairing nicely with Concealing Shadows. Trigger the fear if you can, or make sure the Dahan hit back hard. Mantle of Dread can clear any newly occupied lands or mitigate incoming damage. It can even ensure the fear trigger on Favors Called Due. Consider your allies as well, as it may be better to help them out. All of these powers generate fear, and with the exception of Concealing Shadows, all are slow. So we can see that fear is paramount to this spirit, and will generate fear just by its very existence. In a single player game, we should be able to generate at least one fear card every turn after the first. Since Shadows Flicker Like Flame isn't a spirit that gets involved directly, let's condense all of these pieces into a more strategic framework. Start with Favors Called Due and Mantle of Dread. This allows us to concentrate Dahan and possibly push a build into that same land. Follow up with Concealing Shadows, and on turn 1 or 2, place your presence to utilize Crops Wither and Fade. Use Darkness Swallows the Unwary as often as possible to stop builds. While Shadows of the Dahan can be really useful, don't rely on it exclusively. Lastly, keep track of your potential range. Good positioning will mean that you won't always need a solid plan for your slow cards, and are better able to adapt with changes during the invader phase. And with that, let's get started with the demo game. As a low complexity spirit, I'll be using the power progression deck and disabling the Branch and Claw expansion to simplify our decisions during play. Alright, let's begin. Turn 1. The invaders explore into the jungle. And to use our innate power, we'll need to open up our second card play, which means we need the last growth option to have enough energy. Let's place our presence to set up Crops Wither and Fade in land 2, and play the cards we discussed earlier. Since we don't need to add a Sacred Sight yet, the range 3 for our presence allows us to help our allies, so keep an eye out for that. At the moment, the higher jungles looks like a good target for Favors Called Due, but for now, let's move this explorer out of the jungle and see where they explore before proceeding to the slow phase. Exploring into the sands doesn't really change our plan, so we'll still gather the Mountain Dahan into our jungle to both gain some fear and prepare for when they ravage. Since we want those invaders to stay there, we use Mantle of Dread in the sands. Since the wetlands already has a town, it's a likely candidate for a future use of Favors Called Due, so let's push the explorers there. Turn 2. Because we'll be losing our Sacred Sight when they ravage, we'll need to reinforce it or make a new one to continue to use our innate power. And since we have such a low influx of energy, and don't gain any when we reclaim, we'll need to use our last growth option again to make sure we can still function next turn. Because our sands is central to the island, let's form a Sacred Site there, keeping in mind that we won't be able to place our presence reactively on the turn we reclaim. Playing the cards we have left will keep our plan for concealing shadows and gather the explorers out of land number 3. We could allow the build since we're reclaiming concealing shadows, but keeping that card slot open when we can will grant us better options next turn. Our fear card is Emigration Accelerates, which would have solved the sands problem for us, so either way, we don't have to worry about this build. The invaders ravage in the jungles, have no sands that build, and then explore into the mountains. Our only choice for Crops Wither and Fade will replace that city with a town, and then we proceed. Turn 3. With no cards in hand, we reclaim, granting us Dark Entangled Woods, which generates fear in a land and adds defense if it's a mountain or jungle. If you're not playing with the power progression, pay attention to the elements more than the effect. Having a moon is highest priority, although a fire and moon will put you in a better position to unlock the second tier of RN8 next turn, which we'll go over in a bit. This new power may work in our favor next turn, but for now, let's figure out these mountains. With no need to defend, let's select Favors Called Due, and then we choose between Crops or Mantle. Both of these cards have their uses here, but since using Favor on the higher mountain will both generate fear and clear the land once we gather one of the explorers, let's play Crops to reduce the incoming city in Land 2, and hopefully we'll be in a position to defend it next turn. Using RN8 to gather one of the mountain explorers increases our chances that the Fear card will prevent that build, and Seek Safety will do precisely that. So we push the last mountain explorer into the wetlands to keep them concentrated. After the Ravage and the build, we find that they've explored into the mountains again. Since Land 7 isn't blighting anymore, we're going to change our plan slightly. Instead of the high mountain, we're going to gather the Dahan into Land 2. While this won't generate fear, Crops Wither and Fade should leave the way for clearing this land and preventing the higher mountain build next turn. Turn 4. Since we have a bit of working energy, let's use the second growth option to gain a new power card. Shadows of the Burning Forest targets a land with invaders, generates fear, and pushes some invaders out. Without the power progression, pick enough elements to at least get the first threshold for RN8, and bonus if you can trigger the second. We unlock our third card play and place it in land number 2. Shadows and Mantle provides the 2 fire we need for the second innate effect, and we're going to allow the Blight to make sure the land is cleared with Concealing Shadows, though we could try to defend it and hope the Fear card rolls our way. Let's use our innate to gather the Explorer into the sands, maximizing our ability to keep the next Explorer from building. Destroying these invaders also tips us into Terror level 2. After concealing our Dahan, we reveal our Fear card, Tall Tales of Savagery. This allows us to remove some invaders from our mountain. Since neither option will prevent the Blight from happening, let's pick the Explorers to still gain fear when the towns are destroyed. And in hindsight, we can see that a gamble with Dark Entangled Woods would have paid off. As they finish their turn, take note that our slow powers aren't likely to be that useful this time, other than having provided the elements we needed for our innate power. Mantle of Dread will still provide fear though, so let's use that, and then we carry on. Turn 5. We're currently in Terror level 2, and if we glance at our fear deck, we see we're only 6 fear away from Terror level 3. With Shadows, this is easily accomplished as long as we have enough cards. Reclaiming reveals the Jungle Hungers, a major power that destroys all non-city invaders and all Dahan, plus an extra city if we meet the threshold, which is 2 moon and 3 leaves. Since it doesn't look like we'll be needing defense anytime soon, let's forget Dark Entangled Woods. While we do have a few options to win here, the Jungle Hunger just seems more fun. The threshold means we play Crops Wither and Fade, plus Shadows of the Burning Forest, which also grants us the second tier of our innate power. Because we'll hit our victory condition this turn, it doesn't matter where we gather our explorers, so I've gathered them into the other wetlands. With our fear cards, Dahan and Hearthand allows the Dahan to clear the lower jungle, and the next fear card, Overseas Trade Seems Safer, isn't that useful this game, and so we proceed. The invaders have nothing to ravage, build only at land 6, explore into the jungles, and because our coast is clear, that means they only explore into land 8. If the game were to continue, we'd want to use shadows to push the jungle explorer and tag any of our land for the extra fear that crops provides. But ultimately, the jungle hungers swallows the last of the invaders as we wipe the board using shadows flicker like flame. Some final thoughts on this spirit. Don't be afraid of attrition. Lands blighting and destroyed presence are sometimes necessary sacrifices. Prioritize proper positioning. Understand what might be coming up, and place your presence to capitalize on multiple scenarios. With the sequence I'm presenting here, the game will regularly end by turn 4, and if the invader and fear decks end up in your favor, even turn 3 wins aren't uncommon. Alright everyone, that's all I've got this time. Hope you gained some insight, and good luck in your next games.